Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a calm and peaceful moment today. Take a slow breath and allow your mind to relax for a moment. In the last story, we talked about something many people struggle with: why learning English feels so difficult, and why speaking does not come easily, even after years of study. Today, we are going to take the next step. We are going to talk about something important: how to learn English naturally. Many people believe learning English must be hard. They believe it requires long hours of study. They believe it requires strong discipline and constant effort. But what if that is not completely true? What if learning English could feel more natural? What if it could feel less like studying and more like understanding? To explore this idea, we need to look at something very simple. How do humans learn language in the first place? Think about how you learned your first language. You did not begin with grammar rules. You did not memorize vocabulary lists. You did not take tests. You listened. You listened every day. You listened without trying too hard. You listened before you understood. At first, everything sounded unclear. Words were just sounds. But slowly, something began to change. You started to recognize patterns. You began to understand meaning. You began to connect sounds with experiences. And one day, you began to speak. Not perfectly, but naturally. This is how language learning is designed to work: through exposure, through repetition, through experience. But for many people, learning English happens in a very different way. They study rules first. They memorize words. They focus on correctness. And because of this, something important is missing: natural input. Without enough listening, the brain does not develop strong patterns. Without patterns, language does not feel natural. It feels difficult. It feels slow. It feels forced. And this is why many learners feel stuck. They understand English, but they cannot use it naturally. So what does it mean to learn English naturally? It means learning in a way that matches how the brain works. Not forcing the brain, but supporting it. Not pushing too hard, but repeating gently. Natural learning begins with listening. Listening is the foundation. When you listen, your brain collects information. It learns how words sound. It learns how sentences are formed. It learns how meaning is expressed. At first, this process is slow. You may not understand everything. You may feel confused, but this is normal. Understanding grows over time. Each time you listen, your brain becomes more familiar with the language. And familiarity is very powerful, because when something feels familiar, it becomes easier to understand. It becomes easier to remember. And eventually, it becomes easier to use. Another important part of natural learning is repetition. Many people try to learn something once and move on. But the brain does not work that way. It needs time. It needs repetition. When you hear something again, your brain recognizes it faster. When you hear it many times, your brain begins to expect it. And this expectation is what creates fluency. Fluency is not about knowing many words. It is about recognizing patterns quickly. It is about understanding without thinking too much. And this only comes through repeated exposure. But there is something else we must understand. Natural learning does not feel like pressure. It feels like flow. When you are learning naturally, you are not forcing yourself to understand everything. You are allowing understanding to grow slowly. You are giving your brain time. And when you do this, learning becomes less stressful. It becomes more enjoyable. And when learning feels enjoyable, you continue. And when you continue, you improve. This is the key difference. Many people stop learning because it feels too difficult. But when learning feels natural, it becomes part of your life, something you can continue without stress, something you can enjoy. And this is where real progress begins. But there is still one important question left. How do we actually create this kind of learning in daily life? How do we turn this idea into something real? And this is where the story begins to go deeper. From understanding the idea to learning how to apply it. Now that we understand the idea of natural learning, we can begin to explore how to apply it in a real and practical way. Learning naturally does not mean doing nothing. It means choosing the right kind of input and using it consistently. The first step is choosing the right material. This is very important. If the material is too difficult, your brain cannot follow the meaning easily. You may hear many words, but they feel disconnected. This creates confusion and frustration. If the material is too easy, your brain does not grow enough. You may understand everything, but you are not learning new patterns. So you need something in the middle, something you can understand partially, but not completely. This is where the brain works best. It begins to fill the gaps. It begins to connect meaning. It begins to learn actively without pressure. This level is often called comprehensible input. It means input that you can mostly understand, even if some parts are unclear. This type of input helps your brain grow naturally. The second step is repetition. Many learners avoid repetition because it feels boring. They want something new. They want something different. But the brain learns through repetition. When you hear something once, it may feel difficult. When you hear it again, it becomes clearer. When you hear it many times, it becomes natural. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates confidence. So instead of always looking for new content, try to stay with the same content for a longer time. Listen again and again. Each time you will notice something new, a new word, a new expression, a new pattern. This is how deep learning happens. The third step is reducing pressure. Many learners feel they must understand everything. They feel they must be perfect. They feel they must improve quickly. But this kind of thinking creates stress, and stress blocks learning. When the mind feels pressure, it becomes tense. When the mind is tense, it cannot absorb information well. But when the mind is relaxed, learning becomes easier. So it is important to change your mindset. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to continue. The fourth step is creating a daily habit. Consistency is more important than intensity. Studying for a long time once is less effective than studying a little every day. Even 10 minutes a day can create strong progress over time, because the brain learns through repeated exposure. When you listen every day, your brain begins to expect the language. It becomes part of your routine. It becomes part of your environment. And slowly, English begins to feel more natural. The fifth step is allowing time. Many people expect fast results. They want to see progress quickly. But language learning is a slow process. It grows quietly. At first, you may not notice any change. You may feel the same. But inside your brain, something is happening. Patterns are forming. Connections are building. And over time, these changes become visible. You begin to understand more. You begin to recognize words faster. You begin to feel more comfortable with the language. This is how natural learning works. It is not fast, but it is deep. Another important part of natural learning is enjoying the process. If learning feels like a burden, it becomes difficult to continue. But if learning feels interesting, it becomes easier to stay consistent. So choose content that you enjoy. Stories, simple conversations, topics that interest you. When you are interested, your attention increases. And when your attention increases, learning becomes more effective. So natural learning is not only about method, it is also about feeling. A calm mind learns better. A curious mind learns faster. And a consistent mind improves steadily. At this point, you may begin to see something clearly. Learning English naturally is not complicated. It is simple. But it requires a different way of thinking, a different way of learning, and a different way of approaching the process. And this leads us to the final part of the story: how to continue this journey in a way that creates real change in your life. So now we come to the final part of this story. How can you continue learning English in a natural and sustainable way? The answer is not about doing more. It is about doing the right things consistently. Learning English naturally is not a short journey. It is a process that grows over time. So the most important thing is not speed. It is continuity. You do not need to study for many hours every day. You only need to stay connected to English regularly. Even a small amount of time can create change. 10 minutes a day may seem small, but over weeks and months, it becomes powerful. Because the brain learns through repetition and exposure. When you stay connected to English every day, your brain begins to adapt. It starts to recognize patterns faster. It starts to understand meaning more easily. And slowly, something changes inside you. English no longer feels foreign. It begins to feel familiar. And when something feels familiar, it becomes easier to use. Another important idea is trusting the process. Many learners feel uncertain. They wonder if they are improving. They wonder if they are doing the right thing. But progress in language learning is often invisible at first. You may not notice it day by day, but if you continue, you will see it over time. You will understand more than before. You will think less when listening. You will respond more naturally. And one day you will notice something surprising. You are using English without thinking too much. This moment does not come from pressure. It comes from patience. It comes from consistency. And it comes from trusting the process. Another key part of natural learning is letting go of perfection. Many learners want to speak perfectly. They want to avoid mistakes. But this creates fear. And fear slows down learning. Mistakes are part of the process. They are not something to avoid. They are something to learn from. When you accept this, your mind becomes more relaxed. And when your mind is relaxed, you learn more effectively. So instead of asking, "Am I speaking correctly?" you can ask, "Am I communicating?" This small change in thinking can make a big difference. Because communication is the real goal of language, not perfection. Another important idea is patience with yourself. Everyone learns at a different pace. Some people progress quickly. Some people take more time. Both are normal. Comparing yourself to others can create unnecessary pressure. So focus on your own progress, your own journey, your own experience, because learning English is personal. It is not a competition. It is a process of growth. Another important part of this journey is enjoying small successes. When you understand a sentence, notice it. When you recognize a word, appreciate it. When you feel more comfortable, acknowledge it. These small moments are signs of progress, and they help you stay motivated. Because motivation does not come only from big results. It comes from small, consistent improvements. Over time, these small improvements become something bigger. They become confidence, and confidence changes everything. When you feel confident, you are more willing to try. You are more willing to speak. You are more willing to continue. And this creates a positive cycle. You practice more. You improve more. You feel better, and learning becomes part of your life. At this point, English is no longer something you study. It becomes something you experience. You listen without effort. You understand more naturally. You speak with less hesitation. And this is the goal of natural learning, not to force the language, but to allow it to grow inside you. So if you remember one thing from this story, remember this. Learning English is not about studying harder. It is about learning in a way that matches how your brain works. When you do this, everything changes. Learning becomes easier. Progress becomes natural. And speaking becomes possible. Thank you for spending this time with the story. And as always, see you in the next story.